Good afternoon and welcome to the Renew Rooms in Wood Street. This is a Tenantspin project. My name is John McGeer and Tenantspin are currently working on a project known as Shrinking Cities, a Shrinking Cities exhibition. And this discussion today is in conjunction with that exhibition. Today I'm joined by Mr. Rob MacDonald of John Moores University, Tim Fielding and John Byrne. Now we have other panellists, they'll introduce themselves as they come into the show. We're having a discussion about polarisation. So I'm going to hand you over to our chair for the afternoon, John Byrne, who will kick off things in a minute and explain the whole routine. Later on, any questions from the audience will be welcome on the project. It'll be an interesting discussion. It's casual, so just take it easy and just join in.
Okay, my name's John Byrne and I'm a senior lecturer at John Moores University School of Art and Design, and I'm also the manager of the site project. And myself and my colleagues have been working for the last month or two on a project called Shrinking Cities, which John's just mentioned. Shrinking Cities is an international exhibition that travels around from country to country, and it brings together architects, designers, artists, critics and theorists broadly to look at the phenomena of urban shrinkage, or more clearly cities like Liverpool and Manchester and other European and North American cities beginning to lose their population. As part of this project, Rob MacDonald has curated a project which you can see a bit behind you, called Polarisation. And what I want to do initially is to ask a few broad questions about shrinking cities, Liverpool, and polarisation, before starting a discussion and a debate on the work itself. So I'd like to begin really by asking Rob MacDonald. Rob, do you think Liverpool is a shrinking city?
Thanks, John. I think when I was asked to curate this exhibition, I spoke to a number of people within the university and in the city generally, and raised the question about, is Liverpool shrinking? As soon as you say that to people, there's a knee-jerk reaction that no, Liverpool's not shrinking. Have a look at Paradise Street, have a look at Prince's Dock, it's not shrinking. So that's like one reaction to it, that it's why is it in this category of global cities that have had major shrinkage. But from my point of view, if you walk no more than a mile from the city centre, from the pier head, you'll soon appreciate that Liverpool is a very polarised place. The amount of derelict land, the empty properties, the vacancy, the history of kind of health problems in the city, it proved to me that it is a polarised city with a shrinking kind of edge. If you imagine, as I do, half a donut. Liverpool is half a donut. The hole in the middle is the city centre. The actual edge of the city is the donut. Well, the donut is being eaten, and it's being eaten by all kinds of forces. So in answer to John's question, Liverpool's definitely shrinking, and it's shrinking at the edges. Historically, at its zenith, Liverpool had a population of about 900,000 people. That's now half of that. It's an amazing kind of reduction in population. What the city used to offer from a public perspective point of view in the 1920s and 30s was incredible. You know, the service that the city gave was a world-class kind of city. What the Liverpool City Council offered to the citizens was incredible. The rate of people voting in Liverpool, you go to Granby or to Kirkdale, only about 14% of people actually vote in Liverpool. If you go to Croxteth, same applies. Even if you go to Woolton, the leafy suburbs of Woolton, probably, you know, it's about 50 to 70%. So people in this polarised city are disenfranchised from what's going on in the city centre. I think the exhibition that our students from all disciplines, and I think it's important that it's, you know, come from all disciplines, it's architecture, interior design, product design, graphic design, you know, the whole range of disciplines have done a wonderful job in being like what I call cultural anthropologists. They went out to these different parts of the city and they brought back all this incredible stuff and made it into a wonderful exhibition. And you've got to look at every part of it to really appreciate it. So, long answer, but kind of, yes.
Yes. On the subject of the exhibition of the work that's being put together by students and staff from John Moores University School of Art and Design, I'd like to just move on and to continue to build a context before we open out the debate. I'm going to ask Casper Jones here to describe the project and how it took place and how that fits into some of those themes and issues about shrinkage and shrinking cities that Rob's just illuminated for us.
Okay, yeah, I'm with the interior design department in John Moores, and I've also previously been involved with ways of imagining the city, ways of modelling spaces which we already kind of know and understand. And so what I was doing in this project and the way in which we kind of responded to this was to think about different places which we could visit which would actually change the way in which we understood the city. So we wanted to visit, as a group, different landscapes or spaces which were working in kind of opposed ways. And that was really how I conceived of polarisation. If I can just say firstly about polarisation, one of the kind of aspects of it is if you think about a kind of a motor or an engine or any type of kind of energetic process, the way in which movement happens or change happens is through the relationship of different poles. Okay, so kind of energetically, the thing of polarisation existing is potentially dynamic. It's really to do with the relationship between the different kind of poles of activity, and these can be kind of rich and poor, dense and dispersed, any other ways we might kind of conceive of, you know, kind of opposition or difference. And so kind of in terms of shrinking cities, I understand polarisation as kind of opportunity and a way of kind of looking to find an opportunity. But in our particular way of describing what polarisation was, I chose to look at two environments, one which is kind of highly organised, determined, kind of mechanical and technological, and another which is highly kind of informal, natural, organic, and both of these are kind of productive environments. And so we kind of added to our map of the city by visiting one which was the kind of car production plant at Halewood, which is actually all the way out on the city boundaries. And so that was our kind of, responding to the idea of going to the edge of the city. So we visited there, we visited the car factory, we visited Speak, and kind of the environs around the car factory, all went together on the bus. And then coming back in, we visited these kind of allotment areas, or kind of long-established allotments which are in South Liverpool. And kind of these were two, in terms of their environments, kind of completely different, both in terms of what they are there to produce, the way in which they're kind of structured and organised, the way in which people's relationship to how they work there is, one being totally voluntary and the other being, if not coerced, but very, very kind of strictly determined. So it was about polarisation in terms of types of environment, and also in terms of types of energies which were kind of existing there. And so those were the two kind of poles that we started from in terms of our kind of the kind of energies that we started to explore in order to start doing this exhibition.
Okay, thanks for that. We've got the benefit as well of having 3 students here who've worked on this project to continue building up a context about shrinking cities and the work that's actually here in Renew Room. I'd like to first ask Georgia what you thought of the project, and I believe you worked on, I don't know if the camera can see this, there's a kind of metal sculpture behind here which is holding up some washing lines with boxes, and I just wondered if you'd be able to talk us through what yourself and your colleagues began to do and how this fitted in with some of the ideas that Casper's been talking about.
Okay, well, I'm an interior design student, so I worked closely with Casper on this project, and the group that I worked with consisted of about 6 people, and we visited the Jaguar factory and also the allotments, and from that, specifically from the Jaguar factory, we found the robots that they used very imaginative and led us in a creative direction to form this, what's been described as a beast behind us. And we used materials that we found from our trip and visits to the Speak area to kind of put it together and to represent what we believed our trip was about. And I think it was really interesting for us because being students, I think only one of us was from Liverpool, and so going out into the Speak area, it was really wonderful to see other areas of Liverpool that you don't see as a student because you're in the city centre, and so that was really kind of eye-opening to like really discover the city, and so that's where this model came from, and yeah.
I think, thanks for that, George. I think that's really interesting. So one of the things that the project began to open out for you is a different perspective of Liverpool.
Yeah.
Because as we can talk about later, Liverpool has quite a tight city centre, and I think it's perceived by lots of people from the outside and through the media in very, very specific ways. And I think it's very interesting that you were able, via this project, to actually, as a student in Liverpool, to be able to find the kinds of places that you wouldn't usually be able to find. On that kind of subject, I'd like to ask Tim Fielding over here how you interacted with this particular project. I think yourself and your colleague Mary, Mary Artina, interacted in the project in quite a different way.
Yeah, we looked at the centre of the city really, which was principally the back bit in Maisonettes, which lie sort of adjacent to the Catholic Cathedral and the site for the new School of Art and Design. And there was sort of a polarisation that existed right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
With these Maisonettes. And
Is that between the Maisonettes and this new building
the
project?
new building and the cathedral.
Yes.
So it was really a project that our tutor was looking at, wasn't it, Mary? Patricia.
Yeah, it's an isolated community in the centre of Liverpool, and they have families, young children, and they seem to be on their own with no contact relation-wise with the rest of Liverpool, and they feel that way. And the tutor, Patricia, in the day, wanted to draw them in some way into this project to get them out, learn a bit more. We had a few relational aesthetic pieces, and we got the residents involved in a tea party and to see if we could get them involved in this project in some way. And then what we also did was, well, I looked at the isolation, because that's how they feel, it's very isolated. And because they're tenement blocks, which you don't find these days, people tend to have houses and spaces. They don't have gardens and yards, and they use the front areas of their houses to be, they have washing lines, which is something as well you don't see in cities potentially. So I went around trying to find the washing lines to see if it was just backbitten that had this, and was unable really to find public lines on display. But we noticed in Liverpool there was lots of telephone cables across the streets, and so lines of communication were, whether you met and did you wash them and hung it out, and now it's telephone. So the period of change has been from this physical to this communication to this telephone lines. That was my observation.
And just behind Backbitten there's a small children's nursery, apparently the only nursery in the city centre. And they do a small toy library that I visited. And this is where I got the idea of using the building blocks, representing movements of structures within the city as well.
Yeah. So those lines of communication, from washing lines to telegraph lines, and those ideas of the boxes, does that go some way to explaining the kind
Yes.
of the
Lines
pulley
of
systems?
communication and lines of attachment. This was the
Yeah.
idea behind that.
That's really interesting. I think we've got some very interesting ideas that are beginning to knock about, which will be ripe for discussion in a minute. We've got Rob's very eloquent description of Liverpool as being in many ways a shrinking city, though with the kind of publicity that surrounds Liverpool, which will be capital of culture next year. Often people seem to be in some kind of denial about that, and a kind of polarisation that you think you've found, Rob, between a developing physical city centre which is based around commerce and shopping, and the outskirts of Liverpool, which Casper was interested in taking students to, which gave people like Georgia a very different kind of perspective on how Liverpool actually hangs together as a living, beating, pulsing being. And yet right within the heart of this new redeveloping city, you find a situation like Backbitten, which is a very traditional community becoming increasingly isolated, which is literally being built around as we speak, and surrounded, like almost, must beginning to have some almost siege mentality, and the ideas of things like nurseries still existing within this very close and enclosed city centre. So I think we've got a very dynamic idea of the kinds of conditions that go together to build up and make Liverpool at the moment. And Rob, you...
Yeah, I think I was taken especially by what Casper was saying about, is it possible to take the concept of polarisation and opposites and reverse this process and make it more positive and creative? I think that's a subject we think is quite worth considering. How can a project like this, which essentially starts off, from a very critical point of view in terms of looking at what's happening, and turn it into a positive approach? So how could a project like this be kind of planted? It's planted in the renew rooms at the moment, and could it be planted somewhere else in Liverpool that would have a different kind of effect? We're kind of sitting here largely kind of academics, we've got a creative interest in it. How could it actually be supplanted somewhere else and grow into something else? And I'm quite interested in this idea of reversing polarisation through creativity. I mean, the whole issue of if you've got magnets, light poles repel, or light poles attract. There's a very famous architect called Cedric Price, deceased architect, and he set up a number of projects that went by the title of magnets. And they were magnets, he placed them in different parts of the city, attached them to different things. Might have been a community, might have been a space. How could a magnet kind of change things? So I'm quite taken by what Casper was saying about reversing polarisation.
I think it's a really interesting project, and as I've already said, it seems to be raising a lot of issues. And I think your final point, Rob, about using creativity to start building some links between these areas and situations of polarisation to try and get some kind of creative fusion to do things different and to bring something positive out of a very creative hubbub like Liverpool is a really interesting point. And it's on that issue I think I'd like to bring John back in from the Tenantspin perspective to begin to perhaps ask some questions as well.
John. Well, could I just pass a comment first? And it's simply this, and I've made this statement so many times, there can only be about 10 people in Liverpool who haven't heard it. It's an age relation thing. I'm 76. Now, the pivotal thing is a shrinking city. It's not like a shirt you put in the washing last night and you get out this morning, it's shrunk. It's a gradual process. And when I was 16, I hate saying that, that was 60 years ago, at 5 o'clock this evening in Liverpool, you'd hear hooses blowing all over the place. And the streets would be teeming with people. And as Robert says, there was 900,000 population in Liverpool at that time. On the docks alone, as I made an episode about, there's 22,000 people employed. You had factories, dinky factories, you had sugar factories on the dock road, you had massive warehouses, you had the war changed a lot. It changed it, well, as it changed the whole country, it changed the world, but it changed Liverpool tremendously. And is it like, if a city is shrinking, is it a bad thing? Or is a city, does its population reflect the opportunity that lies in that city? If you suddenly take the industrial heart away from a city, Liverpool was so varied in its products. We recently did research on this area where we're sitting now on Bold Street. Laurie Gates from the fact centre, myself, went to library. The amount of trades that were situated just in this couple of square miles around there, it would be impossible to refer to one trade that wasn't situated. Coal merchants, brass foundries, hatters, dressmakers, clubs, everything. The war changed it all. People disappeared. As Rob said again, there's approximately 500,000 people emigrated from Liverpool. So, as a shrinking city, if that population had not moved from Liverpool, I think Liverpool would be in real trouble now, because there wouldn't be the way to sustain them. Yes. And then come to the arts. The arts. Now I've got to be honest on this. Again, as a 76-year-old, it took quite a few years for me to realise that art was not a huge painting on the wall, a country scene of what's this, and I used to go, hang on, somebody said, no, that's not, that's not. Then I got to realise the world's changing and there's a modernistic view coming through. And what has happened now? Liverpool is now one of the main modern artists, you might say arteries of the country. But will it sustain like the population? Again, another quote I made to Mary before. We're building places, we're building dwellings in Liverpool. They're building them now, they're pulling properties down and building more properties. But it's a fact, it was stated under Liverpool in the last 3 weeks, there are over 4,000 empty flats in Liverpool. Now what are they doing? Are they looking ahead of it? Well, it could go away. So that's what it is with me. It's been an age thing. And I would say you can speak with it from experience. And it's God's art that's existed in this city for 150 years. Have you ever anybody who's ever walked along the dock road in Liverpool? Well, the dock road the dock itself is a huge estate. You could live on the docks if you didn't want to pay your way. The people of today they'd never moved in there. You could eat, dress, everything on the docks. Pilfered it, but you lived in your dressing boxes. And the docks were then closed by a huge wall, stretched for about 4 miles. And it was built by Napoleonic prisoners of war. And the wall itself was a work of art, because the entrance to the gates were in the shape of turrets, castle turrets. Now, for some reason, at some time, somebody said, let's start pulling them down. And now it's bits and pieces. You have a stretch of 300 yards and you have half a mile wire fencing, steel wire fencing. That would have been, next year coming up, when more people visiting that wall on the top row once they got word of how it was built 150 years ago by Napoleonic prisoners situated in this country. But no, at the last minute they stopped it. You can go down and see it. When you see the parts of the wall that's standing, it's like looking at the ruins in Rome. You see, oh, this is the original, this part's the original. It's a gradual thing, and as I say, whether shrinking, whether being a shrinkage city is good or bad, you've got to really go into it.
Yeah.
As I say, if that 900,000 population still existed and hadn't changed at all, we'd have something like 1.5 million people. But we can't sustain the population at the moment. So as regards to shrinking city, I don't think it's like catastrophic.
I was just going to say, I do think it's shrinking.
Okay. Yeah. Would you like to expand on that?
John, can I just comment? I think Laura's right. See, again, I remember the time when that's all stopped. The exodus just got reversed. Liverpool did start moving on. And it's like water that's found its own level. And I think it's going to stay like this, and possibly it's going to advance because of the art rail, because of things that's happening there, indistinct from manufacturing and things like that. I think we have other things that come into being in Liverpool, which are going to sustain us, and possibly moves ahead. But anyway, you better be small, compact, and what you do, have quality, rather than be huge and have diminished quality.
It just depends when you look at it, it's shrinking from, like, because obviously during the war the population did really diminish because a lot of people died and there was a blitz and things like that, and then during the 70s and 80s, which were the dark times of the city, people did leave because there was nothing here. But I do think since sort of 97 and onwards, more people have come back to the city to live. I think the arts, like John was saying, does employ a lot more people now than perhaps it did before, of all different types, not just academics. And I think that city centre developments like high-rise luxury flats, obviously there's so many of them now, someone thinks there's a lot of people here to live in those flats. So I don't think it's shrinking, I actually think it's growing.
I'm getting John to an large on that. There was a time not so long ago when the whole country shrank because in the 50s the population of this country was very near 70 million. It went down to just over 50 million. So the whole country shrank. Modernisation, technology, it all helps too. But then again, it has to find this level.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I have a tendency to agree with you. I think the idea of shrinking cities as a premise to put on an international show where people examine different locations is interesting. But I actually personally also find that quite limiting and straightforward and on the verge of being quite dull. If I'm quite honest. And I think as well as Shrinking Cities team who came over from Berlin, several of whom had visited Liverpool 4 or 5 years ago, they were astonished by how Liverpool's changing. Absolutely astonished. And I think there are interesting problematics with that, but I think it's also interesting, I agree, to talk about changing cities. Sorry, you wanted to come in on that?
I was just thinking that whether or not you say Liverpool is shrinking, is not shrinking, is not really the issue. The kind of significant thing is the fact that the role of the city is completely altered, right? Yes. And as a result, there is an amazing context here, which is a rare context. Okay? We've kind of been an industrial city, we're a post-industrial city. Also, we haven't developed a whole kind of balloon of service things, nor do we have the city, which has got in kind of as much kind of international investment and so on as like cities like London have. And so it's in this kind of rare position of having kind of passed through all the stages that we know of making a 20th century city, and then gone beyond that. And there are these kind of amazing set of kind of opportunities here of being a city which grew with this immense kind of vibrancy and then has kind of lost population in different ways. And so to me, I think it's sort of the kind of models which we're looking at in terms of kind of sustainability, how to live with less kind of waste, less waste of energy, less waste of materials, less kind of distances travelled, all this type of thing. Liverpool offers a kind of, a concept within which, like, lifestyles which kind of work like this, or lifestyles which are more integrated, actually have more opportunity to exist. Both in terms of the idea of, which we're looking at in the Back Bitton project, where you say, like, a whole, like the city centre not being just a place where you have 1 and 2 bedroom flats for professionals, which is this kind of very brittle sort of model, but actually, there's a whole people existing, families living in the city centre, there being space for them, there's actually like a ridiculous surplus of space, surplus of materials, and so on.
And the families are living though, where do the families live?
Well, it generally more dispersed, or more like out of the city centre. But Liverpool, the thing is, Liverpool offers the opportunity actually for kind of configuring a city in a very, integrated way, potentially. Right? I'm not saying that is the tendency. I mean, this thing of polarisation is saying, people, on low incomes and families existing further to the outset, and the kind of city centre being different.
I think that just before I pass on to Rob, who wants to come back on that, I think this point about the point that's just been made about where do families live, etc., and doing things in different ways is a really interesting one. Unusually from somebody from Liverpool, in the late 1990s, I lived for a couple of years in Manchester, and I worked briefly with a guy called Lee Shostak, who runs a architectural company called Edor, and Edor won the competition, if you like, to rebuild Manchester city centre. And at the time, that offered a very odd model, because all of a sudden there was a lot of rebuilding work to be done, which was caused by the bomb that went off there, as everybody knows. But that threw into sharp light and sharp contrast some of the things that Liverpool's only really getting around to grappling with. And one of those was that there'd been an economic resurgence in Manchester and an absolute explosion in 1 and 2 bedroom flats for young professionals. And the realisation that that wasn't a way to repopulate a city centre, and that more interesting and flexible ways had to be found if families and family units were going to come back into the city centre itself. Otherwise, there was going to be a very stilted kind of economy of people working in the arts and cultural industries, then spending their money on fashion and restaurants, while a more developed and slightly older community would live around the city centre. And I think it might be interesting for us to begin to think about that in Liverpool, because I don't think that much joined up thinking has been done in this city about that so far. I must hand back to Rob, because he's been down to talk about for a while now.
A few things really. First, John mentioned Rome. I think it's important that we remind ourselves that in the late 1900s, Liverpool modelled itself on Rome, and the city councillors, the motto of Liverpool is God gave us leisure to use, and that's from Virgil. That's his kind of definition of what leisure's about and what a city should be about. So using leisure and creativity is important. If you've been to Rome, you know that Rome is an incredibly kind of creative city in all kinds of areas. There's lots of business spins off the arts in Rome. There are parts of Rome where you can wander around the streets and you can peep into little shops and you can see all kinds of artists, working and making picture frames, restoring things, doing all manufacturing. And I think my vision, and I think that's one of the things that we should develop out of this project, is a shared vision of the city for the future, because I don't think anybody has actually got a vision of the future. One of the quotations I put up when we introduced the project was from another kind of unfashionable group of people, the Communist Party from 1935, and they said that Liverpool is an anarchic place. it's where anarchy happens. And I still believe that. I think Liverpool is creatively an anarchic place, and that should really challenge us to think about how does Liverpool plan itself? Who's planning the city? Are there any planners? Are there any creative planners? Are we just dealing with interior design and small spaces around road walks, or are we thinking about the whole city? And I think we need to think about, you know, the whole picture. So I think those kind of points I would add, you know, to discussion. And finally, I can just remember what it was. The final point is in city centre growth. The population over the last few years has gone from about up by 15,000 to 20,000 people, which in terms of the whole city is not really a great deal. Where are the clinics? Where are the doctor's surgeries? Where are the nurseries? They're not being built. What's the integrated thinking, you know, for the city core? And then if you speak to Rod Holmes of Paradise Street, he feels that Paradise Street and the £900 million that's being spent down there will lead, you know, the regeneration of the rest of the city. That's his perception. And I'd throw that into the pool, really. So do we think big projects like that are going to kind of lead to change? I don't think that the spin-offs are going to do that. It's got to be something else. But that's what, you know, Grosvenor, and after all, Grosvenor started off by building Belgravia years ago, and they're incredibly wealthy. The Duke of Westminster, you know, is behind it. It's this wealthy chunk of land at the bottom of Duke Street. If you haven't been down there, you should go and kind of see it while it's under construction with your cameras and your sketchbooks and just record that. I mean, we could do a whole process on Paradise Street, project on Paradise Street, you know, and compare it with this. Quite interesting. So, sorry.
Can I just say, I'm the education coordinator of the RIA. We're just beginning in December. We're working with that, and we're doing a comparison between the Bottle Street and the Paradise Street development, just to see two ways of kind of regeneration and how, you know, how the Paradise Street is like a vision by designers, as opposed to the Bottle Street, which is a collective of people and it's much more individual. So we're taking a group of young people, and take the students, the 14-year-olds, to do that and working with that. So it'd be really interesting to see, you know, and they're going to be viewing it from the Paradise Street development from the rooftop, so they'll get a very different view from, as opposed to immersing themselves in the streets of Bowling Street. So it's going to be really interesting.
The thing that makes me think is that, you know, in the City of Culture next year, you know, do we think shopping is that culture?
No, I think productive activities are culture, like things where people are generating something. And I mean, this is actually a kind of I don't know. It's not an economic thing necessarily. It's more about a kind of a mentality or a spiritual condition or whatever, whereby you realise what is the value that you already have. Yeah, like, and Liverpool has like immense value in terms of the environment, the existing built environment, just the amount of room and the people which are here, and the kind of culture of concentrating on making something from what you have. To me is like that is what the value of the city is about. So things which people value the city for aren't for the shops necessarily. Yeah? And it isn't about what you can consume there. It's about, there's something about the character of the interaction that happens here, the sort of things which emerge culturally out of Liverpool, which is what people value, which is like, in a way, what comes for free. Yeah? It's when we try and do something, it's what we've got. Okay? And in terms of our project, It's like everyone did this thing out of not to gain something, right? To like look at between us, what do we do when we speak to one another? You know, what can we find? You know, and so that as a kind of model, whereby kind of actual culture in terms of what people produce between themselves, you know, is the thing which we kind of value, and that's what we're valuing by doing the project.
I'd like to just hand back to John to see what his comments are for a minute before perhaps we could, because of a good audience here, we could open it up to questions from the floor.
The word culture, if you ask every single person in this room to define culture, you'd more likely get 20 different interpretations. You know, well, culture is an amazing way of life. And Robert mentioned something about this city being known as an anarchist, you know, and I agree with that. It was an anarchist city, but anarchy, like a lot of things, it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. At one time, in the 70s and 80s, this city was known that everybody throughout the country, the world was known, they're all strikers, they're always on strike. But if you look closely into that, nobody strikes for that. Don't just strike for no reason. This city had a heritage of standing up for itself. We were always the heritage, people fighting for rights, because you never got them. Nothing was ever given to workers through the good-heartedness of an employer. Make no mistake about that. You had to either withdraw your labour, and then they did it. They never give it through the good. So heritage, like anarchy, isn't a bad thing. And this says it does have its own culture. It always has that. And culture, to me, is simply a way of life. In a city, it encompasses every person that lives there, every brick, every building. As regards, I used to say this to an architect, if I thought Paradise Street was going to encroach all over this city centre, I'd be the first, I'd get my name down to emigrate as quick as possible. I'd rather look at that wall across the road and that cobbled street there, and I've seen Paradise Street from the outside. I've already made my mind up. I'll go through it once, and I'll never ever see it again. But I'll come up and down Bold Street for the rest of my life, because Bold Street is steeped in heritage, it's steeped in the past, it's steeped in history, and I'd advise anybody in this room to do what we did when we did the Bold Street Road. Research into that street, and if it was all compiled into one book, you'd start the book and you would not put it down until you had finished. If you realise what went on in this short stretch of Liverpool on that street, it is totally spellbinding. I believe we're getting signs that...
No, I was going to ask a question actually.
Oh, I see. You're on the show.
Excuse me. Yeah, I just wanted to see what the panel thought about this idea that we're engaged in this kind of quick fix regeneration at the moment, and the L1 project, for example, might drive a further wedge between for example, we're doing a lot of work in Anfield at the moment, and there's a lot of different partner organisations involved in this 11-year regeneration programme. And I was talking to someone last week who had this magic equation of a sustainable community, and they had all these different partner organisations, and they'd left out health and arts, and it was all about retail and this kind of cafes, and but no kind of idea of who would actually go and use these spaces. So I don't know what the panel think about that. As we've already got empty luxury apartments in the city, and no one being able to afford to live in them, and etc. Is there kind of a danger that in 20 years' time we're going to have this kind of ghost town with lots of empty shells and old wine bars that aren't open anymore?
Yeah. Before throwing it to the panel, I think there is a great danger of that. I think we had a model of that in Liverpool just under 2 decades ago, a couple of years after the Albert Dock regeneration had opened. For a couple of years it was one of the best shopping centres in the country, and full of shops that sold labels you couldn't get outside London, and it was very highly populated by tourists. There was an economic slump, and after that it remained very, very barren for a lot of years. A lot of the properties in there were empty. It's now nearly full again, and a lot of what shops were there for a good long time were kind of the shops that were too grim to be in the back end of Blackpool. They just sold sweets, etc. I think we are in an economy that relies to a great extent on shopping and commerce. There's no getting away from that.
Yeah.
It's one of the big drivers. But unless there is some joined up thinking of how that can be sustained, well, families, health, etc., it's on a short fix, high road to nothing. And we find a very quick statement is a lot of those flats that are empty are there because they're external investment.
Yeah.
They're not empty because people can't afford them. They're empty because people have bought them. They don't want anybody living in them so they can get a first-time resale. And they're being held for investment purposes. And that's another factor to be drawn in. This is all external investment that will disappear unless Liverpool can sustain it. Are there any other comments?
Well, I think the other factor as well is the transient population of the city, the tourists, the commuter, people who don't actually live here. And I think that's going to play a big part in the regeneration of the city.
Yeah.
And I believe Liverpool gets almost as many tourists as York, which is quite interesting.
Yes.
I mean, that's quite interesting about who lives in Liverpool, who doesn't live in Liverpool. The Liverpool Daily Post and Echo, at the moment, are doing a project called the Map of Liverpool, and they're trying to define the actual perceived boundaries of Liverpool. You know, does it include woolly-backs from St Helens, for example, or does it include people on the Wirral? You know, and some people argue that we are a city with the river going through it. And, you know, it's Merseyside is the whole of the kind of, you know, the region. And, you know, are we reaching out to those places, or by kind of thinking about Liverpool city centre, we're being a bit too kind of strained. But this map's quite interesting that they're trying to produce. You should look out for it in the press.
And speaking of transient populations, I think rather like Manchester a couple of years ago, one of the things that sustains Liverpool a lot, of course, is its student population. And we've got an audience here that's primarily made up of students, and I've been dying to throw some time over to the audience for any questions or observations on Liverpool as a shrinking city, whether it's going to survive, what the investment's going to be like. What are your ideas and comments? Has anybody got any? I'm sure you have. Don't be shy.
Well, I was going to say, I think we're acknowledging maybe that shrinking isn't really a problem, and that actually, you know, we went through this massive curve, and now we're kind of back where we were, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But polarisation issue seems to be like much more pressing somehow, and that's something that a lot of cities are experiencing at the moment. I was in Manchester yesterday. And it's a huge problem there. They're like almost a phase on from Liverpool in the generation, but they're experiencing it almost worse than we are. But I think Liverpool specifically experiences polarisation over a very small scale, like almost from one street to the next. Like if you go a street over from where Rope Walks finishes, there's sometimes just nothing, you know. And that's, I was going to open it up and ask if anyone's got any either solution or a reason for why that would be.
Are there any solutions from the floor? Any other ideas or comments on observations on people's experience of Liverpool as students or as members of ACT?
I was just going to say that I'm from Dublin, and in the 80s was a similar kind of setup to Liverpool, and I think the big thing that's resulted in a massive change in Dublin is that it reinvented itself as a city to do with, you know, media and IT and stuff like that. So I feel that industry backbone in Liverpool is still missing. So Manchester now with the media city development and you know they've kind of reinvented themselves. So they've got that backbone. I don't think that we've got that. So there's that missing.
Yeah. Who's not from Liverpool? So quite a few people. And one of the things we're often asked in architecture is, what is our percentage of graduate retention? In other words, you know, will you stay in Liverpool, and what will convince you to stay in Liverpool once you qualify? And I think that's kind of, you know, is the city like a creative place for you to stay, you know, run a business, have families, you know, grow? I mean, some people say, well, they stay for, you know, till they're like 30, and then they go and, you know, procreate, you know, out in the countryside. So, I mean, I think that's an issue like graduate retention, really. If it's just a young person's, but I mean, Dublin, you know, I've been to Dublin once or twice, Temple Bar, you know, lots of parties, lots of drinking, you know, a beautiful city, absolutely beautiful architecture. And I think there are lots of developers from Dublin buying property in Liverpool, aren't there? I mean, that's an interesting connection.
Yeah. On that point, how many of you in the audience who are from Liverpool would be convinced to stay here after your studies? No hands.
That's interesting, John, because I've read a statistic regularly in the Echo. When they're selling the city to students, asking them to come in, one statistic they've always produced that this city, the universities, more people want to finish their education, stay in this city than any other university in the country. I've read that regularly, so, you know, it's, they're always debatable, but there is a point like it.
I think Liverpool's at a really interesting, we were discussing this before, and we discussed this as the Shrinking City project happened, and we'll be discussing it long afterwards. I was discussing it before with Patrick. I think Liverpool personally is at a really exciting point, and there are all kinds of things to be done. I agree that Liverpool doesn't really have that kind of industry or media or art backbone as much as it thinks it has, that it can survive off. And I think it's probably very exciting to be a part of Liverpool at the moment, because there seem to be opportunities to interject and to build, which perhaps were denied to people a couple of decades ago in Manchester, where these problems, as was just pointed out, nobody had really thought them through, but now there's evidence of that. So I'm really looking forward to those debates continuing, to seeing this debate on the website, and I think there's going to be dialogue and debate and questions that people can do online about this particular talk. And I'd like to encourage anybody who's either here today or who might watch this online between now and the 26th of January to get to see the Shrinking City shows here in Wood Street, or at Sight Gallery, which is down at the Albert Dock, or in Cube Gallery, which is in Manchester, and to look at the online database that Shrinking Cities have built up about this whole issue over a good few years. That can be found at shrinkingcities.org. And I'd finally, from my point of view, I'd like to hand back to John to wind us up after this great debate.
Well, it's been an interesting debate, and I'll just make one last point. Have you said to yourself, if you're from abroad, what is Liverpool famous for at the moment? And unfortunately, the point would be all non-constructive themes. If you mention Liverpool football, oh yes, I know that. The Beatles, the Cannon, what's the stuff, but they are there, and I said they're not productive as much as they don't make anything, but they do draw people in. And I believe that let this city of culture come and go by. The people arriving in Liverpool have read about it, heard about it, but never had the cause to come here, and you'll come here and it will then establish itself. But I think it is making its name at the moment in the things I mentioned there. Music, LIPA is now an international institution that always draw people in. The universities will always thrive. And I'll just restate, we've got a couple of minutes, I'll just restate now, I don't think the city has got anything to worry about when it comes to shrinkage. Our grandfathers and our parents, they were great people. They invented adages to suit all these things. Good things come in little packages, that's so you get related to that. It doesn't matter how small the city is, as long as it's emanating thing and things are shooting out from us, that interests the rest of the world. We've got about a minute if anybody wants to throw a quick word in. Well, on that point then, all I'd like to say is thank you very, very much for coming. And when you do finish your studies, think about it. There's better places in the world, but there's also worse. And in my lifetime, I spent 35 years travelling on motorways. I've been from Land's End to John O'Groats. I've been all over the world. when I die, I've already said this, I'll tell God every night, I want to be born again in Boole, which by the way will be taking Liverpool over in a couple of months, which only you people know. I want to be born in Boole, and this doesn't matter, this is a Catholic, I want to marry the same woman I met before, I want to support Liverpool Football Club. In fact, I just want the same life. And I've seen basically every city that's worth seeing. I haven't been to Rome, but I'll get there one day. I've seen more beautiful cities, I've seen bigger cities, I've seen greater cities, but I have not seen a better city than Liverpool. Thank you all very much for attending. I'd like to thank our panel. It's been a very interesting project, pleasant project. As always, we always wish it was 2 days instead of an hour, but it's been very interesting. I hope you all learned something of it and we'll enjoy ourselves from here on. Now I'm selling boxes of Liverpool now.